My video ended up being a lot longer than I expected, so I decided to submit a version that is sped up to 1.5 times speed. If there's any issues with that and it's exporting, just let me know and I can send you the normal version, though this new version should be a lot more condensed. Thank you.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau is known as one of the fathers of the Enlightenment. He's an acclaimed author who's wrote countless of books, many of which have influenced modern democracy as we know it. His works include The Social Contract, Emile, Julie, Confessions, and a bunch of other discourses and stuff. Writing was one of his favorite things to do. He's often regarded as a great thinker and philosopher. That means philosopher. One of the best of his time. But no! The more you look into it, the more cracks you start to see. Rousseau isn't some hero of a historical figure, he's a villain of one. So throw out your previous conceptions of him, because it's time we redefine Rousseau. That's the name of the thing. Background. Rousseau was born in Geneva, Switzerland, and lived from 1712 to 1778. Rousseau's mother died in childbirth, so he grew up with his father, and at age 13 he took an apprenticeship as an engraver. Rousseau did not like this apprenticeship, and once his father was exiled, he had little attachment to the city. This all came to a head one day when Rousseau was taking a walk, and found the city gates closed, so instead of waiting and getting a scolding from his master, he decided to leave and wander this general area. Eventually, during his wandering, he met Madame Devorn, who became his patron and funded his passion for music and writing. Wait, music? While most people know Rousseau for his writing, he was actually a composer in his early life, and wrote the piece you heard at the start of this video, and the piece you're hearing right now. Finally, Rousseau decided to lock in and move to Paris, where his fame actually started. This is where he wrote many of his famous works and started gaining popularity among the masses. In 1750, he wrote his first discourse, and from there, everything has been uphill. Except I lied, and actually his books were banned, and he was wanted for arrest, so he had to wander from place to place. He ran from Paris to Moitié, which is right here, and eventually to an island called Saint Pierre, up here in the lake. Then, he was invited by a friend to England and stayed there for a while. Eventually, Paris got over it, and he was no longer wanted, so he moved back to Paris and lived the rest of his life there. But you know what's crazier than Rousseau's backstory? Rousseau as a person. Point 1. Rousseau is widely known for his revolutionary thinking, paving the way for modern democracy. But were his thoughts really all that good? Rousseau had different views than most other philosophers at his times in terms of political theory. He lays out in his books, The Social Contract, many ideas that were innovative at the time, but a little odd in retrospective. He says in order to buy into the social contract, you have to give up all your natural rights to the government, which sounds pretty terrible, but theoretically you will be granted something similar by the general will. This general will is the idea that what a population generally wants will become law in terms of government. So basically a total democracy. He specifically specifies it has to be a total democracy, however, because he says a representative democracy isn't really true general will. You start to see the flaws in Rousseau's thinking when taking into account the USA, which is arguably the most successful democracy. It doesn't take any natural rights. In fact, our rights are unalienable, and also it's a representative democracy and not a total democracy. So if you can't tell already, Rousseau's ideas definitely had some cracks in them, and they didn't actually really pave the way for anything. Thinkers like John Locke already came up with natural rights, and Baron de Montesquieu already came up with representative democracy and separation of powers. These were both well before Rousseau was even famous. The only thing you can say Rousseau inspired was the French Revolution, and I'm not sure if you really want to inspire that. So why is Rousseau one of the poster children of the Enlightenment when his most famous ideas were recycled, wrong, and outdated? You can see Rousseau's flawed thinking at the forefront when he brings up the idea of noble savagery. Rousseau argues that before society, people lived as completely good and innocent beings in the state of nature. Then once society came along, it corrupted everyone, introducing evil. This concept is the concept of the noble savage. This is just complete BS. Rousseau really thinks that a caveman with no concept of morals or crimes is still morally better than a person living in society even in his age. That's crazy! Because of this, Rousseau was hesitant of innovation, because it could lead people further away from the state of nature, discouraging people from making new technology and arts. Also, for one who talks so much about the state of nature being so good, he never goes off and, lives in the woods. I mean, the state of nature doesn't seem that hard to get into, but to be fair to Rousseau, he does say it's too late to go back. Maybe he's too corrupted by society or something. But if we think the state of nature does exist and it's the best state that humans can be in, why don't we throw all our kids into the woods, have them grow up in the state of nature? You might be saying, well, that's crazy. There's no one to look after the kids, so they very well could die. But according to Rousseau, in the state of nature, people were alone, so this is what was happening, but still is the best state that humans can be in. Hey, I'm not saying anything crazy, I'm just following the ideas of the revolutionary thinker Rousseau. Rousseau obviously never does this because, well, that's stupid. But if we take Rousseau's ideas seriously, wouldn't that be the best course of action? So according to Rousseau, the golden age of humanity was when everybody was isolated from other human beings, living as cavemen, struggling to survive without any technology whatsoever. So I think it's okay to say Rousseau was a little flawed in that train of thought. But why even argue this? Why even try to defend something so, well, silly? Well, because then Rousseau isn't to blame for any of his wrongdoings. He can deflect all criticisms of himself off to society. Rousseau, in his book Confessions, admits to a ton of weird and freaky stuff he did when he was young. It's odd. But one of the only reasons he decides to tell anybody is because, well, he doesn't really feel too guilty about it, because it's not really his fault. It's society's. This all comes together to form a big victim complex that Rousseau can hide under to dodge any responsibility for anything. So taking everything into account, should we really define Rousseau as a genius when he reuses other thinkers' works, except makes them worse, and all the while, he pushes for the most obviously wrong thing in The Noble Savage? Honestly, it doesn't really sound to me that Rousseau is as smart as we thought.
Point two.
Rousseau is incredibly famous,
Even though he shouldn't be.
but you'd think with that fame he would have a lot of friends and support backing him up. But actually, if you look at the history, there was very few people putting up with Rousseau in his later years. Let's see what happened to each of Rousseau's so-called friends. First, we'll look at Madame Duvour. Though they had quite a long history together, with Rousseau being somewhat of her lover, he actually came back from a long trip one day to find that he had been replaced by a younger, more handsome man. Tough luck, buddy. Needless to say, Rousseau lost her friendship and support. But what about his own wife, Therese Levasseur? Surely he should have her support. Well, he did. But he didn't really care for her. He writes about her in his autobiography called Confessions, in which he says, "I never desired to possess her more than I did to possess Madame Duvour, and that the physical wants which were satisfied with her person were to me."
Solely those of the sex.
Wow. He's basically saying he didn't like her as a person and she was just a glorified concubine to him. So Rousseau didn't care for her, but what about his fellow Enlightenment thinkers? Well, he was actually really good friends with thinker Diderot and Grimm, but emphasis on the was. He met these two in Paris, and for a while they all collaborated in the Encyclopédie, all contributing different articles. However, things quickly changed when Rousseau got into an affair with this Sophie person. We'll get into her later, but for now, all you need to know is that she was the lover of a certain thinker named Saint Lambert. Lambert was a mutual friend of all the thinkers, so Diderot and Grimm both told Rousseau to be honest and admit his mistake to him. But remember, it's never Rousseau's fault, it's society, so Rousseau simply said no. When Lambert eventually did find out, he justifiably cut ties with Rousseau, and Sophie decided that she liked Lambert way better, so she kinda ghosted Rousseau. This created tension between all the friends, which eventually culminated when Madame d'Épinay needed an escort. She's Grimm's lover, and also the owner of the house that Rousseau was currently staying in. She needed to go to Geneva, and Grimm and Diderot both thought it would be a nice gesture for letting him stay that he'd accompany her there. I mean, it just makes sense. He's from there, he knows the city, and it's a way to show his appreciation for her. But when they tell Rousseau this, brick wall. He will just not move from his home, and is so incredibly stubborn and just refuses. It's not really like he was doing anything else too, he just really didn't want to for some reason. This finally pushed Diderot and Grimm over the edge, and they could not handle him anymore, so they cut ties. Also, Madame d'Épinay was angry too, and actually evicted him, not just because he wouldn't take her to Geneva, but also for generally just being a jerk. Oh, and remember when Rousseau was in exile and invited to go to England? Well, the guy who did that, David Hume, Rousseau accused of being like a secret agent who was out to get him. David was actually really nice about it and allowed Rousseau to stay, but he pushed away Hume and eventually just returned back to the mainland. Hey, well, at least the general public still likes Rousseau. Yeah, his books were banned and most people wanted him dead. So what's the common thread between all these different incidents? It's Rousseau. It's definitely Rousseau. From all accounts, he's just mean, paranoid, and he just pushes all his friends away. So all in all, why do we praise Rousseau so much when he was mean to everyone he knew? I mean, society had to work overtime in order to corrupt this man to the levels he was at. So do you really still think Rousseau is a societal hero when he can't even be good to one person? It makes you think.
Point three.
Rousseau has a very weird relationship with women, and maybe that's just because Madame Duvour replaced him with another guy, but he still has one nonetheless. Rousseau is a straight-up freak. I mean, he once refers to woman as a species of voluptuousness. That's bad. This ultimately led Rousseau into thinking that women were all submissive and inferior to men. Rousseau says women, and I quote, "constantly remain either under subjection to the men or to the opinions of mankind, and are never permitted to set themselves above these opinions." This is just terrible, and Mary Wollstonecraft realized that. That's why she refutes Rousseau in her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Mary says, no, women aren't inferior and just here to please men. You just don't understand it because you've never been with a woman who truly loves you and understands you. Rousseau just never experienced this because he's horrible to all the women in his life. Mary sees that this treatment of women is terrible, and no one does Rousseau treat worse than his own wife, Therese. She sacrifices everything for this man, and for nothing in return. Rousseau literally had 5 children with her, and basically convinced her to give them all away. Not to mention, Rousseau doesn't even marry her until 35 years of living together. And this isn't because he's scared of marriage or anything, it's just because he didn't want to. In the Confessions, he meets a girl and says he would have married her without difficulty. He's not scared of marriage, he just wasn't feeling it. To make things worse, he cheats on his wife twice, and probably more. Remember Sophie? Yeah, well, Miss Sophie de Udato and Rousseau met one day, and Rousseau was immediately starstruck, and he said Sophie was the only girl he's ever truly loved. Except he's been with Therese for almost 10 years now. He openly admits that the only person he's ever loved was this girl that, mind you, he'd only known for about 3 months or so and then never saw her again. When Sophie finally did ghost him, he was so heartbroken, he wrote a book about it. Julie, his best-selling book, was a book about his feelings for Sophie. And there's no book about, oh, my really dedicated and amazing wife or anything. No, because he only loved this one girl he knew for 3 months and he had to write it down. Are we serious? And his wife had to watch all of that. She was there. But guess what? No matter what, exile or infidelity, Therese supports Rousseau no matter what. She's there by his side, but he does not care at all. And to add insult to injury, in the confessions where Rousseau admits to all of this stuff, he died before it's published, meaning the person who had access to most of his stuff, his wife, had to help publish it. The very book that just dogs on her and talks about other women. This book literally mentions Madame Duvourne almost 2 times more than Theresa, like if you actually count every time their names show up. And just to make things worse, in the confession, Rousseau still calls Voren his pet name of Mama. This married man seriously wrote that down. Whether it be woman as a whole or just his wife, Rousseau is, as usual, a jerk. He's just lucky that Therese can handle it. No honest evaluation of anyone would be without considering both the bad and the good, which I have considered a lot of bad. Here's the little bit of good. For one, Rousseau is actually a really good writer. The Confessions is honestly pretty good. And it couldn't be as good as it was without his brutal honesty. Really, this man lays everything out, and we really don't need to know everything, but he lays it all out, which props to him for being so honest. In all Rousseau's writings and ideas, you can tell he really puts thought and care and intention into it, even though it may be completely wrong. And yes, Rousseau influenced our modern life, while to a lesser degree than a lot of his contemporaries, he still did to some extent. Rousseau actually lived a very simple and modest life. Instead of using all his fame to make tons of money, he actually decided to make more things free and lived a very simple life. And once again, bro's really good at writing. Rousseau didn't get to where he is now for nothing. That doesn't mean he should have gotten there, but it's still. Conclusion. So, with everything taken into account, is Rousseau really everything we thought he was? We herald him as a genius, but honestly, in my opinion, it seems like he's just a jerk. No man's perfect, even if they're in the state of nature, so we have to knock Rousseau off the pedestal we currently hold him on. Rousseau was smart, there's no doubt about that, but honestly, other thinkers had a lot more influence and had a lot better ideas. And while Rousseau can write a killer book, that doesn't excuse all his actions, and doesn't make up for all the hurt he's caused. So throw out what you thought Rousseau was. He isn't a genius, he isn't an insane revolutionary thinker. No, he was a man, a very, very flawed man. Stop holding him so highly in our heads. It's time we redefine Rousseau. Thank you. I'm gonna hang my whiteboard back up now.